It's just after midnight on November 16th, 1999. A 24-year-old woman is sitting behind the wheel of her car on a quiet residential road in Charlotte, North Carolina. She's been shot 4 times. She's 8 months pregnant. Blood is pooling inside the vehicle. Her hands are shaking as she dials 911. She tells the dispatcher she was following her boyfriend's car when another vehicle pulled up beside of her. She then says her boyfriend's name. He's a professional football player for the Carolina Panthers, first-round draft pick. She tells the dispatcher that when the shooting started, he drove away. She's doing the best she can, talking to the dispatcher while losing blood. She doesn't know exactly where she is in the darkness. The 911 call will last 12 agonizing minutes. 4 weeks later, she'll be dead. This is the story of Rae Carruth and Cherica Adams and the night that destroyed both of them. Welcome to the Southern Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Swift. I was 20 years old when all this happened. I remember seeing it on the news and following it the best I could, but the news and the internet was not what it was then as it is today. I remember some aspects of the case, but not all the details. So I wanted to find out what really happened and how this all came about. What would make Rae Carruth do what he did? Why did this happen to Cherica Adams? And whatever happened to Rae? Well, we look at all that on this show. If you end up liking this episode, leave us a review and rating on whatever platform you're listening on. That really helps the show out. If you're enjoying the podcast and want to support what we're doing here, consider joining me over on Patreon. It's called the Hidden Pond Lodge. It's part of the whole, Southern Blueprint ecosystem, I guess. It's not just for, and about supporting the show. It's about being a part of something bigger. The Hidden Pond Lodge is a growing community of people who actually like to get out and do things like hiking, fly fishing, gardening, and we even have a book club and just started a bird club in there as well. Your support keeps the podcast going. It also helps build out the Hidden Pond Lodge and just bringing together like-minded people to connect, share, and be a part of something a little more with purpose behind it. I really appreciate you being here, so let's get into this episode. Rae Carruth was born in Sacramento, California on January 20th, 1974. After Rae's parents' divorce when he was just a toddler, Rae was largely raised by his mother and then his stepfather, Samuel Carruth. That's where Rae gets his last name from. Samuel Carruth wasn't his biological father, but it was his household. And I guess that became Rae's identity. He took his stepfather's last name. In 1988, when Rae was about 14 years old, his mother and then stepfather, they divorced. Even after the split, though, Rae continued using that Carruth last name. It just sort of stuck. But at Valley High School in Sacramento, Rae was a multi-sport athlete, lettering in football, basketball, and track. But it was on the football field where he truly shined. He earned All-American honors as a running back in his senior year. But then came, time to go to college. So he went off to the University of Colorado. He played 4 seasons with the Buffaloes. He had 135 receptions as a receiver and had over 2,500 yards. And in 1996, he earned first-team All-American honors. He wasn't just good; he was pretty elite. And he graduated with a double major in English and education. He was kind of like the whole package. Had a really bright future ahead of him. April 1997 was the NFL draft, and the Carolina Panthers selected him in the first round, 27th overall. It was a 4-year, $3.7 million contract with a $1.3 million signing bonus. He was 23 years old, and everything that he had worked for was coming true. His rookie season, not too bad. He started 14 games, caught 44 passes for 545 yards and 4 touchdowns, tied for first among all rookie receivers. He was named to the all-rookie team. The kid from Sacramento had made it. But then came the injuries. He broke his foot in the opening game of the 1998 season. Didn't catch another pass that year. In 1999, he played just 5 games, 14 catches, only 200 yards. And there were whispers about his locker room presence, about distractions, about it's kind of a seedy underbelly that most people didn't see. Because Rae Carruth had a problem, a pattern of problems. By this time, Rae already had one son, Rae Jr. In the winter of 1993 into 1994, Rae returned home to Sacramento for a visit. While he was there, he reconnected with a girl that he'd known back in high school. Her name was Michelle Wright. About 9 months later, in August of 1994, Michelle gave birth to Rae's first child. At the time that Rae Jr. was born, Rae was a sophomore at the University of Colorado, like we mentioned. He did not attend his son's birth. Instead, he chose to attend the university's football camp. The mother, Michelle Wright, later sued Rae for child support. Rae, by this time, had signed with the Panthers, and a judge ordered him to pay $5,400 a month, which was a drop in the bucket for what he was making at the time. And he negotiated that down to about half of that, to $2,700. He was allowed to do that only if he promised to be a better father. But that didn't happen. At the same time, Rae had his first child and was then resisting child support payments for Michelle and little Rae Jr. He was also involved with another woman. Her name was Amber Turner. Despite refusing to fully support the mother of his child, Michelle, Rae spent freely on Amber. He gave her $500 a month, bought her a Lexus, paid for clothes, lavish gifts. There was no hesitation when it came to spending money on Amber. But that dynamic also changed in March of 1998 when Amber became pregnant. According to Amber's later testimony, Rae immediately pushed for an abortion. She testified that he threatened her, saying, "Don't make me send somebody out there to kill you. You know I would do it." Now, at this time, Rae was in North Carolina. Amber is out in California. And he's basically saying, hey, I will send someone out there to take care of you. Amber ultimately did have the abortion. But then came another pregnancy with a totally separate woman. And her name was Cherica Adams. Cherica Adams was born on June 30th, 1975, near Charlotte, North Carolina. Her mother was Sandra Adams, and her father was Jeff Mooney. Sandra was just 17 years old when she gave birth to Cherica. She was still a senior in high school. Cherica was raised primarily by Sandra and her grandparents, who lived in Kings Mountain, North Carolina, about 32 miles west of Charlotte. In 1993, Cherica graduated from West Charlotte High School. The following fall, she enrolled at Winston-Salem State University, and by 1995, she had left school and entered the workforce. Cherica tried several different jobs, but she found success in real estate. She was good at it, very good, in fact. But Cherica, very driven, also took on a second job to bring in even more money. She worked as a dancer at a strip club. According to her mother, the income from dancing helped provide financial stability, something Cherica valued and worked hard to maintain. In June of 1998, Cherica attended a pool party. That is where, unfortunately, she met Rae Carruth. And from that moment forward, both of their lives moved toward a collision neither of them could seem to step away from. Rae and Cherica were never formally boyfriend and girlfriend. At least that was Rae's version on things. Most sources described it as a kind of, off again, on again relationship, which suggests they did have a relationship, just not a stable one. They saw each other casually. They both did date other people. At one point, Cherica even left North Carolina briefly, moving out of state before eventually returning back to Charlotte. After the summer of 1998, the two stopped seeing each other altogether. By all appearances, the relationship had, just run its course. But in November of 1998, they crossed paths yet again by chance. Rae attended a birthday party for a fellow Panther player. The party was held at a strip club where Cherica was working. They saw each other there and they left together. And then their relationship resumed. By the start of the 1999 season, Rae's position with the Carolina Panthers was slipping. In September, he was benched after dropping a pass in a game against the Jaguars. But it wasn't just one mistake. It was part of a growing pattern. That season, Panthers head coach George Seifert made a decision to move Rae from wide receiver and use him instead as a punt returner. Rae didn't like that, and he intentionally committed errors during punt return drills in an effort to force Seifert to move him back to his original position. But it didn't work. The following month, in October, Rae also suffered a left ankle sprain. We mentioned all the injuries he kept accumulating. And the injury effectively ended his 1999 season. By this point, Rae's football career, once full of promise, had stalled. He wasn't progressing. He wasn't securing his place on the roster. He was getting injuries. And his future in the league was increasingly uncertain. Also, In 1999, back in April, Cherica discovered she was pregnant. After the pregnancy was confirmed by a doctor, Rae asked her to have an abortion. Cherica refused. Cherica had already made up her mind. She told friends she had been through an abortion once before and had no intentions of doing that ever again. According to people close to her, she would have been open to building a life with Rae if that's what he wanted. Either way, Cherica was okay. She had decided she would have the baby and raise the child on her own if need be. She wasn't isolated. She had family nearby. She had support. And she believed she could handle what came next without Rae's involvement if necessary. And by November 1999, Cherica was 24 years old and around 8 months pregnant. She and Rae were not talking about marriage. They weren't presenting themselves as a, committed couple. But they were still interacting, still spending time together. And they were doing some things that looked on the surface like preparation for the future. Rae helped purchase baby furniture on the evening of Monday, November 15th. Rae asked Cherica to go out to a movie. But it wasn't just going to be, just the two of them. It was going to be a double date. Rae's friend and Carolina Panther teammate Hannibal Navies and his girlfriend were also going to go along. Cherica drove to Rae's house before the movie, and she left her car there, and the two of them went to the theater together. They watched the 9:45 p.m. showing of The Bone Collector at Regal Cinemas in South Charlotte. When the movie ended, Rae and Cherica returned to his house in his SUV, and Cherica believed the night was over. She planned to get in her car and head home. But once they arrived, Rae kind of changed the plan. Rae suggested that they go to Cherica's apartment instead. Rae would drive his vehicle and Cherica would follow behind him in her own car. Just after midnight, around 12:15, Cherica called her cousin and roommate, Madre Floyd, and she asked him to tidy up the apartment. She wasn't expecting company that night, especially not Rae, and she didn't want the place to look messy. Cherica told Madre that they would be there in about, 15 minutes. Before they left Rae's house, Cherica then watched Rae make a phone call. And around 12:19, Rae told the person on the other end that they were about to leave his house. Nothing about the call struck Cherica as unusual, at least at this point. She got back into her BMW SUV, and Rae got into his white Ford Expedition, and Rae drove ahead of her to lead the way. As they traveled toward Cherica's apartment, Rae suddenly slowed his vehicle to a stop. Cherica had no choice but to slow down as well. They were on a 2-lane residential street. There were no stop signs and no traffic lights, no obvious reason for Rae to be driving this way and just coming to a sudden stop. Because of the size of Rae's SUV and the narrowness of the road, Cherica couldn't pull around him to see what was going on. She was basically just kind of boxed in. Moments later, a Nissan Maxima pulled up alongside Cherica's driver's side window. The car came in close, about a foot away, and from the back seat, someone rolled down the window and fired into Cherica's vehicle. 5 shots. 4 struck her, 1 in the neck and 3 in the torso. When the gunfire stopped, the Maxima sped away, and so did Rae Carruth. It's now 12:31 a.m. Cherica is shot, but she is not dead. She's alive and struggling. She managed to steer her vehicle onto the nearest front yard of someone's home, and she calls 911 from her cell phone. Rae Carruth is nowhere to be found. He did not contact the police. He did not call an ambulance. And he did not go to Cherica's apartment. No, according to court records, Rae went to the home of Hannibal Navies, the same teammate he had just gone on a double date with. There, they played video games. Cherica was able to tell 911 exactly what had happened to her. And by 12:43 a.m., an officer arrived and she was able to tell him in person what happened. At 1:10 a.m., Cherica arrived at Carolina Medical Center. The doctors rushed to remove the bullets and repair the damage. And also, there was the baby. Not long after Cherica was first brought to the hospital, Rae Carruth arrived. And according to Sandra Adams, which is Cherica's mother, he did not come along. In interviews, she said Rae showed up with several people. His friend and teammate Hannibal Navies, Navies' girlfriend, and another woman, Candace Smith. Sandra later told the Charlotte Observer that while they waited for updates, Rae sat between Candace's legs as she rubbed his shoulders. Sandra said Rae never asked, Sandra how Cherica was doing, and he never asked about the baby. Cherica had already picked out the name for the baby. It was going to be Chancellor Lee Adams. Chancellor was born into this world 10 weeks early and weighed 3 pounds, 11 ounces. Chancellor was stable, but unfortunately, with the lack of oxygen, he did have some brain damage. When Cherica's son was delivered, the section on the birth certificate identifying the father was left empty. Later, Sandra Adams explained that Cherica had originally planned to name her son Chancellor Rae Carruth, but at the hospital, she made a last-minute decision and listed her own last name instead. Yeah, I probably would have done the same thing. At one point, though, Rae did ask to take a photograph of the newborn, but he didn't want to hold him. And that detail stood out to the hospital staff. Rae also demanded a paternity test, but at the same time, everybody that looked at this kid knew that he looked exactly like Rae. Not long after giving birth, Cherica, her condition worsened. Roughly 3 hours later, doctors inserted a tube to help her breathe. From that point forward, she could no longer speak. That morning, a nurse named Tracy Willard asked Cherica if she remembered what had happened that night. And Cherica nodded yes. Unable to speak, she wrote out a description of events on paper. She laid everything out. Cherica's father then spoke with her directly. He had asked, a very specific question. Was there anything about the road that might explain why Rae had slowed down or come to a complete stop? Were there any stop signs, any traffic signals, anything like that? Cherica shook her head no. There had been no reason for Rae to come to a sudden stop like that. Afterward, doctors insisted that Cherica rest. Medication was administered, and Cherica drifted off to sleep. After that, she never regained conscious again. The gunshot wounds had caused catastrophic internal injuries. Her spleen, pancreas, stomach, liver, and both her small and large intestines were damaged. She was hemorrhaging blood at an extreme rate, losing liters of blood each day. For nearly 4 weeks, Cherica remained on life support. There was no improvement, no signs of recovery, no indication that she would ever wake up again. On Tuesday, December 14th, 1999, at 12:43 in the afternoon, Cherica's family made the decision no family ever wants to face. They took Cherica off life support. Cherica then passed away, and her funeral was held 4 days later on Saturday, December 18th, at Victory Christian Center. The details Cherica shared during that 12-minute 911 call would become the foundation of the entire case. What she told the dispatcher that night helped investigators reconstruct the entire night and the attack. So I'm going to take you back now to the morning of the shooting, which happened, around 12:30-ish in the morning. But it is now 7 o'clock in the morning. Cherica is still alive in the hospital. Rae Carruth is there with his friends, and all the, family members are there at the hospital. But the homicide detective shows up, the sergeant shows up. They arrive at the hospital, and they first speak with Cherica's family to get all the information that they could. Then they approach Rae Carruth, who was still in the waiting room area. And investigators, they were already aware of the 911 call that Cherica had made, where she said Rae's name and what had happened. But they did not tell Rae any of this. They didn't say what she had said on the call. Instead, they asked him a very simple question. What do you know about what happened? And Rae said he knew nothing. After detectives questioned Rae at the hospital, they wanted him to come back in for further questioning. But before that could happen, Rae lawyered up. He got a really prominent Charlotte defense attorney. And once counsel was involved, Rae declined to be interviewed. Before contacting a lawyer, however, Rae had consented to a search of his vehicle and gave up his cell phone. The SUV itself offered little value, but that cell phone, that was a different story. Investigators documented all the numbers Rae had recently called, and in the days that followed, they subpoenaed additional phone records belonging to both Rae and Cherica. Those records led them to a 24-year-old man named Michael Eugene Kennedy. Now, Michael Kennedy was a drug dealer. According to reporting by the Washington Post, Rae had known Kennedy for less than a year. They met sometime in early 1999, likely January, February-ish, at a auto parts store. Once police connected Kennedy's number to Rae's phone, they reached out to Michael. Within a week, Michael had told authorities pretty much everything. Based on Michael Kennedy's statements and corroborating evidence, investigators concluded that Cherica's killing had not been spontaneous at all. According to testimony, the plan had been discussed months earlier. The motive mirrored earlier patterns in Rae Carruth's life. He did not want to pay child support. Cherica refused to terminate the pregnancy. Faced with another obligation he did not want, Rae chose a permanent solution. On the evening before Cherica was shot, and Cherica was shot in the AM, but the evening before, sometime around 7, 8 o'clock, Rae reached out to Michael Kennedy. He asked Michael to come over and watch a football game, but a football game was basically the last thing on Rae's mind. Rae wasn't just looking to watch a game or kill time before his date with Cherica. What he needed was access to a vehicle that wouldn't stand out, something that could blend into traffic and disappear after the fact. He needed to talk to Michael. So Michael arrived at Rae's house driving a rented Nissan Maxima. Michael didn't come along. With him was 19-year-old Stanley Drew Abraham Jr. Now, Michael and Stanley had grown up as neighbors in Charlotte. Stanley, like Michael, was involved in drug dealing. When they arrived, Stanley went inside the house and waited, and Rae and Michael stayed outside and talked privately. And that's when a third man appeared, someone neither Michael nor Stanley had ever met before. That man was named Van Brett Watkins, a 39-year-old who was originally from Brooklyn, New York. Now, according to North Carolina Department of Correction records, Van Watkins also used the name William Edward Watkins, which belonged to his deceased brother. By his late 30s, Watkins had already had an extensive criminal history with multiple felonies, convictions for weapons offenses, assault, and making violent threats. Watkins was a bad man. While incarcerated in New York, Watkins had once set another inmate on fire after an argument involving remarks about a female relative. Court records also documented incidents where he pistol-whipped a man, threatened his wife with a meat cleaver, and stabbed his own brother. In interviews over the years, Watkins repeatedly claimed he had carried out 4 contract killings. Now, law enforcement was never able to confirm those claims. Watkins never provided information that helped close any of those unsolved cases. But what Watkins did do was he talked a lot. Rae had met Watkins earlier that year at a strip club. I know that's shocking. Watkins worked security at the door. Later, through a mutual acquaintance, Rae was introduced to Watkins again when he needed work done at his home. The project was supposed to be a fence. Watkins was asked to come by and provide an estimate for that fence, but the fence was never built. In one of his later interviews, like I said, Watkins liked to talk a lot. Watkins claimed the fence was never meant to exist. According to him, the construction talk was a cover, a way to discuss something else without drawing attention. Watkins said Rae repeatedly pressed him to hurry up with the fence because he didn't want the dog to get out, which is, of course, code for the baby, which is absolutely sickening. Rae supposedly asked Watkins how much it would cost to beat a girl up so she could abort the baby. And Watkins allegedly said that he didn't beat up girls. He goes, I kill people. Real stand-up dude there. But eventually, Rae and Watkins settled on a price of $6,000 for the contract killing of Cherica Adams. Rae had also initially wanted this done while he was in South Carolina at training camp, and this would give him an alibi while he's away at training camp, this would take place. But that never happened. And so that is how we get to the night of November 15th and this whole ruse of the movie date with Cherica. So that night, when Watkins arrived at Rae's house, like I said, Michael Kennedy and Stanley Abraham were already there. And according to court documents and secondhand accounts, nobody was armed, at least not yet. Watkins would tell the Charlotte Observer later that showing up without a weapon was intentional. His story? He had reservations about killing a woman. Said he felt trapped. Claimed Rae had gang ties, and he was worried about what might happen to his own family, his girlfriend, his kid, if Watkins backed out. Which is kind of funny because Watkins is a huge man, and I'll put photos up on Patreon so you can see what everybody looks like and everything. But Watkins is a big dude, and he's a bad man, right? I've told you all the things he's done, but he's worried. You know, one he has reservations about killing a woman, and he felt, quote unquote, trapped by Rae Carruth, who supposedly had gang ties, and was worried about his own family if he didn't go through with this contract killing. So he didn't want to back out. And this is all nonsense if you want to take my thoughts about it. Watkins had a huge rap sheet, but I think this was just a smart move on Watkins's part to not have a gun when he arrived, or have his own gun. I think the real reason why he came empty-handed was simple. He didn't want to be the one purchasing the weapon that was going to murder someone. He was smart. I don't think he was scared. So Michael Kennedy handled the gun. He left the house, he tracked down a friend, and came back with a .357 caliber Charter Arms revolver. Cost him $100. Paid for by Rae Carruth. Kennedy also brought back a box of bullets. Watkins took the gun, filled it with 5 rounds, and that was that. While this was happening, Cherica arrived for her date with Rae. Something didn't sit right with Cherica. She phoned her mother, Sandra, before they left for the date. There were too many people hanging around, and Rae kept stepping away to make phone calls. And Cherica figured he was on the phone with another woman. And Cherica came close to just bailing on the whole thing. But Rae said it was time to leave for the movie. So Cherica got off the phone with her mother, and they went on this date. Rae and Cherica headed out with their double date with Hannibal and his girlfriend going to the movies. The other 3 men got into formation. Michael Kennedy was behind the wheel of the rented Nissan Maxima. The young Stanley Abraham was riding in the front passenger seat, and Watkins, who had the gun, was in the back seat. Cell phones stayed on, and they tracked Rae's movements all evening, driving loops around Charlotte while Rae and Cherica were at the movies. Stanley Abraham's lawyer would argue in court that young Stanley was clueless about what was really going down that night. He was just an innocent kid caught up in someone else's nightmare. Wrong place, wrong time type of thing. At least that's what was the defense strategy. Michael Kennedy's testimony, it partially supported that claim. He told investigators that Stanley Abraham didn't figure out anything until they had stopped for gas and were waiting around. And when Stanley realized what was happening, he asked to be dropped off, but Kennedy refused. He said he was just too scared to be alone with Watkins and kind of doing this, just the two of them. Rae had signaled to the 3 men that the movie was done and they were leaving and then they were going to be going to Cherica's apartment. And that is when the three who had been waiting all night in that Nissan Maxima, they moved in. In an odd sort of coincidence, Rae Carruth was driving his vehicle in front of Cherica Adams' car, and they were on Rae Road. Rae, as we've said, stopped his vehicle, blocking Cherica. The three men in the Maxima had caught up to them and were ready. Kennedy steered alongside Cherica's BMW, pulling within a foot of her driver's door. Watkins lowered the back window. He shot 5 times. 4 bullets connected, and they then split into the night. After Cherica was rushed to the hospital and detectives began working the case, they focused heavily on the information she gave during the 911 call and on-scene statements. Cherica identified Rae as the person she had been following when the shooting happened, and that immediately put him at the center of the investigation, clearly. As I mentioned before, when detectives spoke with Rae at the hospital, he initially denied knowing anything, but Rae didn't really have to say anything. As I said, his phone records did a lot of that for him. Investigators documented the recent calls and the numbers associated with it. And one of those numbers stood out. As I said before, police later subpoenaed the full call records for Rae's phone and compared them with Cherica's and kind of built a timeline of the night. They saw repeated contact between Rae and a number that did not belong to anyone in his normal circle, and that number traced back to Michael Eugene Kennedy. Once detectives identified Kennedy, they located and contacted him directly. This happened within days of the shooting. According to court testimony and reporting from the time, Kennedy did not hold out for long. He talked pretty quickly. Within roughly a week of being approached by investigators, he began cooperating fully. Kennedy admitted he was the one driving the rented Nissan Maxima the night of the attack. His statements provided detectives with the first detailed account of how the plan unfolded, who was in the car, who had fired the gun. His cooperation gave police the missing pieces they needed to identify Van Brett Watkins as the shooter and Stanley Abraham as the front seat passenger. Watkins, after the shooting, had fled straight to New York. He stayed gone for just over a week before returning to North Carolina and had checked himself into the Villager Lodge. This was a bad move. Detectives were already watching that motel. A phone number connected to it had popped up in Rae's records. And so detectives were covering the lodge there. And they spotted Watkins right away, based on Kennedy's description, and they arrested him at 2 a.m. on November 25th, which was Thanksgiving Day. Watkins, of course, first denied any wrongdoing, but once Watkins found out that Kennedy had cooperated, the denials, those all stopped. And like I said before, once Watkins started to talk, boy, did he talk a lot. And that same day, officers took Rae Carruth into custody at his residence. At that point in time, the case had shifted from a shooting investigation into a conspiracy case built around phone records, witness statements, and Cherica's own words from the 911 call. Rae Carruth was initially charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and shooting into an occupied vehicle. Cherica Adams was still alive at the time, though critically injured and in trouble, which meant the case had not yet become a homicide. From the beginning, Carruth maintained that he had nothing to do with the attack. Through his attorney, he declined further questioning, like I said, and began preparing for what would become a highly public legal fight. By then, the Carolina Panthers had also cut ties with Carruth. The first major development came at Carruth's bond hearing. Prosecutors argued that Carruth posed a significant flight risk. They emphasized his financial resources, his access to travel, and just the seriousness of the charges. The courtroom was, of course, packed, filled with reporters, Panther fans, and members of Cherica's family. Initially, a judge set Rae Carruth's bond at $3 million, and Carruth's legal team immediately began working to secure his release. On December 6, 1999, he posted bond. The conditions of Rae's release was pretty strict. He had to surrender his passport, and he was required to remain in the Charlotte area and had to check in regularly with authorities. And for a brief moment, it looked like the case would proceed slowly through the courts while Rae Carruth remained out and free. But that changed. On December 14th, 1999, Cherica Adams died from complications related to her injuries. The charges against Rae Carruth then escalated to first-degree murder. Now, Rae had by then changed attorneys. His attorney now was David Rudolph. If you have ever watched the documentary The Staircase on Netflix, David Rudolph was the one that represented Michael Peterson in that case. And he's a very good attorney, and I highly recommend that documentary, and it might be a podcast episode that I do in the future. Anyways, David Rudolph called Rae and left him a message on his answer machine, telling Rae that Cherica had passed away and that he really needed to turn himself back in. As soon as the warrant for murder was issued, Rae Carruth disappeared. For a while, no one knew of his whereabouts. Rae's mom did an interview and said that she had spoken to her son and that he would turn himself in, but he did not. Rae was missing. Instead of turning himself in, Rae instead contacted his friend Wendy Cole around 10 p.m. the night that he finds out that Cherica had passed away. Wendy was a friend. Rae trusted her. According to investigators, Wendy Cole helped Rae Carruth leave North Carolina. She was headed out west anyways, going to California. Remember, that's where Rae grew up. And he wanted to get as far away from North Carolina as possible without drawing attention. And according to Wendy, Rae begged her to take him. Rae would hide in the trunk of her car. He had $3,900 on him. He had a cell phone. He had some energy bars and some bottles so he could urinate in them. And they made it 500 miles outside of Charlotte into Tennessee at a town called Wildersville. Wendy stopped at a Best Western to stay the night. After she checked in, Wendy started second-guessing herself. She was, after all, harboring a fugitive. So Wendy ended up calling Rae's mom to let her know where her son was. And then Rae's mom then reached out to authorities to let them know where Rae was, because she was afraid that if things kept going, an incident might happen and Rae would be killed. The FBI eventually got to the hotel in Tennessee and confronted Wendy. She first tried to act like she didn't know where Rae was, but eventually she let them know that he was hiding in her trunk. And so the authorities went out to the car, opened the trunk, and there was Rae. It's December 15th. Rae has been caught, and he is now on his way back to Charlotte. Rae would sit in a jail cell a year before the trial started, but now it was time to face the music. The image that's basically burned in everybody's mind is, the authorities finding Rae in that trunk. And for prosecutors, that's gold for them, because those photos and videos of Rae being found in that trunk, that implies guilt in court. That implies flight. It's a man who knows that he did something wrong and he's running away. So this case then grows into something far larger than a local murder trial. Every part of it is high profile. It's been on TV. You've got an active, or I guess an ex-NFL player. You have a pregnant victim, a coordinated ambush. You now have a surviving baby. And you have co-defendants willing to talk. And this case is not just built on one witness either. It's built on a chain of events. You have Cherica's 911 call. You have her statements to the police. You have the phone records, and you have these co-defendants that I keep talking about that are very willing to talk. And now it moves to the court. And during pre-trial, the prosecution makes it very clear that they are going for first-degree murder. The death penalty is on the table. And that matters because it changes the entire posture of the defense. This isn't, can we reduce the sentence? This is now life or death for Rae Carruth. And so behind the scenes, plea negotiations start to happen. Rae Carruth he's offered a deal that would take the death penalty off the board if he pleads guilty. But he doesn't take it. His position stays the same. He wants a trial. The judge also grants Rae Carruth's request to be tried separately from at least one of the other defendants. And that's important because it prevents the jury from seeing all of them at once and kind of deciding as a group that they all must be guilty. It forces the state to prove Rae Carruth's own role in this. And then the trial begins. The jury that is selected is 7 men, 5 women, 9 white jurors, and 3 black. The courtroom is, of course, packed. It's a national case. Every camera from every news channel that you can think of is there. And the tone is tense from the very first week because the witnesses in this case are not clean-cut civilians. They're criminals, all of them. So the prosecution's job is to not just tell the story and the facts. It's to convince these 12 jurors that these imperfect people, these criminals, are still telling the truth about the most important parts. The defense's job is the opposite. They want to tear down these criminals and take them apart and create enough reasonable doubt around their reliability to be honest. So the prosecution lays out a simple argument. This wasn't random. This wasn't spontaneous. This was all arranged. This whole attack was arranged. Their narrative is that Carruth didn't want another child support obligation, didn't want the baby, and couldn't control the situation. Again, Cherica was going to have this baby with or without him. And Rae was already, having to pay other child support, and he just didn't want this burden. So prosecution is claiming that, he chose a permanent solution to this whole issue, that he would hire someone to take out the problem and make that disappear. And so the prosecution lays everything out. Rae Carruth invites Cherica to the movies. He controls the movement. They leave in his car to go to the movies. They come back. Then he wants her to go to her place, which why wouldn't they just stay at Rae's place? And then now she's following him in her car. He boxes her in. The Maxima pulls up and, lays out all the details of everything that happens. Then, though, the jury is able to listen to the 911 call. And that's where the whole room changes. Years later, the jury foreman would describe the jury as essentially spellbound, listening to this 911 call. It's one of the rare pieces of evidence in the trial that doesn't need translation. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need a detective or lawyer to explain what you're hearing. It's a dying woman trying to tell the world who just tried to kill her. And if you haven't listened to the 911 call, it's definitely out there. And it's super sad. And Cherica does such a great job on the call. She's not acting hysterical or crazy. You could tell she's in pain, but she's very almost calm-like, able to tell the dispatcher what exactly happened and tried to tell them where she is and given as much detail as possible. It's truly remarkable, but the jury is able to hear all of this. And like I said, you don't need anybody to translate it. You're just hearing things in her own voice. Then Michael Kennedy testifies, and he places himself at the center. He's the one that's driving the rental car. He explains the coordination, the calls, the positioning, the way they tracked Rae and Cherica on the night of the attack. He tells the jury that Rae Carruth was part of the planning and part of the execution. And then after that, we've got Van Brett Watkins, who takes the stands, and the entire trial becomes something else. Watkins is not a normal witness. He's volatile, he's intimidating, he's unpredictable. In court, he threatens people, he has outbursts. At one point, he makes a statement that's essentially a direct physical threat to Rae Carruth's defense attorney in describing what he could do to him. Again, David Rudolph is Rae's attorney. He's the one that's in the documentary The Staircase, which, again, I think everyone needs to go watch. It's on Netflix. But again, Watkins tells Rudolph, "I'm 286 pounds, and I could rip you from limb to limb like a rag doll." Prosecutors later said Watkins was unlike any witness they'd had ever dealt with. And again, Watkins is a bad man. But Watkins says that he was the shooter. And in this case, you have the shooter speaking directly to the jury. He gives details. He tells the jury he fired 5 shots into Cherica's vehicle. He also testifies to the idea that this was arranged by Rae Carruth, and he's the one that set this all in motion. The defense team basically was saying, yeah, none of this happened the way you're saying it. They wanted to construct an alternate story that would explain, what happened the same night, but without Rae Carruth being the organizer. Basically, the defense team was saying, yeah, you can't really build this whole murder for plot hire thing in a few hours. The prosecution keeps talking about how this was orchestrated months in advance, but the thing is, they didn't even have a gun until that night. They had to go get a rental car. They had to stop for gas. They were sorting out weapons. Kind of everything was last minute. And the defense also kind of pushes this theory that what happened was tied to drugs, not a pregnancy. Their position is that Ruth got caught around the edges of criminal activity and that the shooting was connected to that world, that Watkins and Kennedy were not reliable narrators of motive because they had reasons to blame Carruth and minimize themselves. And then the defense also tried to damage Cherica's character as well, suggesting she had relationships with famous athletes and entertainers, and attempted to blur the emotional clarity of the victim and shift the jury into thinking, man, this is all messy. This is complicated. We really can't trust anyone here, including Cherica Adams. And if there's doubt, a reasonable doubt, Rae should be released. When it's time for deliberations, the jury is not deciding whether a shooting happened. We know that happened. What they're deciding is what is Rae Carruth's legal responsibility in this whole situation. And on January 19th, 2001, the jury comes back with a verdict. They find Rae Carruth not guilty of first-degree murder. But they convict him on 3 other charges. Conspiracy to commit murder, and one that's confusing to me, discharging a firearm into a occupied vehicle and using an instrument to destroy an unborn child. Now, the discharging a firearm into a vehicle is odd because he's not the one that actually fired the weapon, but that's what they got him on. There was an interview with the jury foreman, and he was pretty upfront about everything. He says that none of them believe that Carruth was innocent of everything, but they couldn't get a unanimous first-degree murder charge. There was one juror who wouldn't budge, and so they had to basically compromise on it. That's how you end up with the outcome. No murder conviction, but you do get the conspiracy convictions and the shooting into an occupied vehicle and using an instrument to destroy an unborn child. And with that, the length that Rae got was 18 years and 11 months up to 24 years and 4 months. That was what Rae was facing at sentencing for the death of Cherica Adams and the attempted murder of her unborn child. That 18 years and 11 months is the minimum that he could get. The 24 years and 4 months is the maximum. Rae Carruth serves nearly the full minimum. He was released from prison on October 22nd, 2018. He served 18 years, 10 months, and 7 days in total. After his release, he relocates to Pennsylvania, and he was under supervision for a period, and he works as a barber now, a trade he learned while incarcerated. His son and Cherica Adams' son, Chancellor Lee Adams, he survives. He grows up with the consequences of that night. He has cerebral palsy and lasting neurological injuries. He is raised in Charlotte by Cherica's mother, Sandra Adams, who becomes the constant in his life after everyone else has kind of disappeared and, after all the headlines are gone and everything like that. And I'll share photos of Chancellor. He is such a sweet-looking guy. She takes him to a lot of the Panther games. He does look a lot like Rae Carruth, but it's really great to see that Sandra is taking care of him. Carruth at one point talked publicly about wanting a relationship with his son Chancellor, and later stated that he would not pursue custody. And Sandra Adams had been clear in public statements that Rae Carruth will not be raising her grandson. She made that very, very clear. Van Brett Watkins, the shooter in this whole thing, he takes a plea deal and receives a sentence of 40 to 50 years in prison. He dies of cancer in a North Carolina prison in December 2023. He died 24 years after the shooting of Cherica Adams. Cherica Adams was 24 years old when she was killed. if you believe in coincidences and everything like that. It's very, very interesting. Michael Kennedy, the driver, he received 11 years and 8 months to 14 years in prison. His cooperation with investigators and testimony against Rae Carruth significantly reduced his sentence. He was released on October 5th, 2011. Stanley Abraham, the front seat passenger who was only 19 years old at the time of the shooting, he also pleads for a reduced charge. Prosecutors determined Abraham's role was significantly smaller, and he did not fire the weapon. He ultimately pled guilty to conspiracy to commit murder. He gets a suspended sentence of 97 to 126 months and 5 years of supervised probation. Abraham later violated probation conditions and was briefly returned to custody before completing his supervision. He has had additional criminal charges in the years since. You would think you would learn your lesson, but I guess some people don't. There's no version here where it feels justice was truly served, because Cherica Adams doesn't come back. She's gone. And Chancellor grows up carrying physical issues for the rest of his life. Family and friends of Cherica have to deal with the trauma left over. What's left is this trail of decisions, small ones at first, then irreversible ones. Rae Carruth had talent, money, future. Cherica was just 24 and had her life taken away because she became pregnant. And that's what this is about. There's nothing else there. She became pregnant. Rae didn't want to deal with that. It's sickening. And the fact that this ass clown gets to live the rest of his life angers me. Cherica had 12 minutes on a phone line in the dark trying to save herself and her unborn child. The only reason we know exactly what happened is because she fought long enough to tell the world. The only reason Chancellor is alive is that Cherica was calm and brave enough to call for help. And I'm so glad she did. And there you have it. This was a heavy episode for me. The more I researched it and talked about it, and then just recording this episode, the angrier that I got. Just the fact that Rae is out and about, and he's a barber, and he's living his life, really angers me. I know, just covering true crime and reading news headlines, there are people that got busted for marijuana and drug charges that got longer sentences than what Rae got. But regardless, this is the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Please share it with friends and family, and make sure you are subscribed so you get alerted when new episodes come out. Again, if you want to support the show further, consider joining my Patreon. Again, it's called The Hidden Pine Lodge. For only $4 a month, you get additional content, like I said, I'll be putting some photos and additional notes into Patreon for you guys to look at and read. We have a book club, and we also just started a bird club if you're into all that. So come over and talk about the podcast and anything else that we have going on. Big thank you again to my producer, Corey Insco, for getting the show out and making me sound so lovely on the air. And yeah, I'm looking forward to doing the next episode. And everyone, I will talk to you later.